Last winter, I decided to sell an expensive watch that I inherited from my grandfather. I put an ad up on Craigslist and got a few inquiries, but people were either lowballing me or asking me stupid questions, which made me think they weren't serious. One evening, I received a voicemail from someone named Alex who said he was interested and asked me to call him back to discuss details. I called him back the next day, and he seemed very eager. He agreed to my asking price without any haggling and suggested we meet in a Walmart parking lot to make the exchange. We agreed on a date and time for the meeting, and I was happy that I would get my initial asking price. On the day of the meeting, it was snowing pretty heavily. I arrived at the agreed location and waited in my car, scanning the lot for the buyer, but there was no sign of him. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I noticed a car parked a few rows away, with a man sitting inside just watching me. Something about it felt off, but I thought I'd approach him anyway and check if he's the buyer. I went up to the car and knocked on the window. The man rolled it down and asked me what I wanted. "Hi, are you Alex from Craigslist?"
"No, I'm not,"
he replied, and then rolled his window back up while giving me an annoyed look. I went back to my car and tried calling Alex again. He picked up this time and said that he couldn't make it today because of the snowstorm, then hung up, without even trying to arrange another meeting. I was really frustrated to have been waiting there almost an hour for nothing. I sat in the lot for a few minutes, while the man in the other car kept looking at me. He then picked up his phone and started talking to someone, while still staring at me. I was starting to get a bit weirded out, so I started driving home. As soon as I drove off, the other car drove off after me. As I made a few turns, I noticed that he's following me from a distance. It was starting to get dark, and the snow wasn't slowing down. I had about a 20-minute drive to my house, but with some random guy following me, I didn't want to drive straight home without knowing his intentions. I drove around town for a while, making random turns and hoping he'd let up. A few minutes later, I could no longer see him in my rearview mirror, so I decided to start heading home. I lived in a suburban house about 15 miles from the town where our meeting was. As I was driving home, the snow slowed down a bit, but there wasn't a living soul on the road. Halfway to my house, I noticed a car approaching quickly. As it got closer, I got a sick feeling in my stomach. It was the same weirdo from the parking lot who was following me earlier. He overtook me aggressively and stopped suddenly, in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, trying not to crash into him, but couldn't stop in time and hit his rear bumper. He got out of the car, waving around a gun, then came up to my window and yelled at me to roll it down. I was in full-on panic mode. I didn't want to risk getting shot if I drove off, so I rolled down the window slightly and asked him what he wanted.
"Give me the watch and your phone, now!"
he yelled while pointing the gun at me. I realized that this whole thing was a setup, so I did what he asked. He grabbed them, got back in his car, and took off. I tried to see his license plate, but it was all iced up and covered with snow in a way that I couldn't read it. I was shaken and distressed, but I turned around and drove straight to the police station. I gave a statement and a description of the man, but unfortunately, in the coming days and weeks, nothing came of it. The police advised me not to sell expensive items on Craigslist ever again, because it attracted a lot of bad actors due to the anonymity of it. I guess I learned my lesson the hard way. Moving to a new city for work, I quickly realized I needed a bike for daily commutes. Tight on budget, I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a good deal. That's when I came across an ad for a used bike that seemed perfect. A decent brand, in good condition, and reasonably priced. I contacted the seller, a guy named Eric, who agreed to meet me at a local park to finalize the sale. Eric was a young guy, around my age, friendly, but a bit too talkative. The bike was just as advertised, and after a quick test ride, I paid him in cash. Eric, oddly, seemed keen to know where I worked and about my biking routes. I brushed it off as harmless chit-chat and headed home with my new purchase. A few days passed, and that's when things started getting strange. While biking to work, I noticed a figure on a bike following me at a distance. Initially, I thought it was a coincidence, but it happened repeatedly. Each time I glanced back, the person would turn away, making it hard to see their face. I shrugged it off as paranoia, but the stalking continued. One evening, as I locked my bike outside a coffee shop, I saw the same figure lingering across the street. A chill ran down my spine when I realized it was Eric, the guy who sold me the bike. I confronted him, asking why he was following me. He laughed it off, claiming it was a series of coincidences. Unconvinced, I warned him to stay away. He said that there was no need to get agitated, since we were friends and nothing happened. Now I started to get creeped out by this guy. I hardly knew him and he thinks that we're friends? That night, I couldn't sleep much, wondering the whole night if confronting him had been a mistake. The next day, things escalated. I found a note tucked into my bike seat at work. It was from Eric, saying he enjoyed our little encounters and looked forward to more. I was officially scared now. This wasn't just some weird coincidence. I was being stalked. I reported Eric to the police, but without concrete evidence, they could do little. I started changing my biking routes, but somehow, Eric always found me. It was like he had a tracker on me, or more likely, the bike. One evening, as I biked through a less crowded area, I realized Eric was following me again. Panic set in as I pedaled faster, trying to lose him. He kept up, his presence like a menacing shadow. In a desperate attempt, I entered a busy market area, weaving through the crowd. Finally, I managed to lose him, or so I thought. When I reached home, shaken and out of breath, I found another note from Eric, this one more unsettling. It said, "You can't get rid of me that easily." That's when it hit me. The bike must have had a tracker. Frantically, I examined it and found a small GPS device hidden under the seat. I handed the bike and the tracker over to the police. This time, they took the matter seriously. Eric was arrested a few days later. It turned out he had a history of stalking and had used Craigslist as a means to find targets. The whole experience left me deeply unsettled. My view of the world, once friendly and safe, had been irrevocably altered. I shared my story with friends and family, not to scare them, but to make them aware of the realities of the digital world we live in. A world where the line between online and offline safety is increasingly blurred. One of my hobbies is playing and collecting vintage guitars. One day I was browsing Craigslist and stumbled upon an ad for a vintage Fender Stratocaster at a very decent price. The seller, a guy named Rick, lived in a nearby town, about an hour from mine. We discussed the details and he suggested we meet up halfway between us at a self-service gas station. I agreed that it was fair for both of us, as neither of us wanted to drive far in case the deal fell through. He said he worked late, so the earliest he could make it to the gas station was around 8 p.m. I agreed, and on the day of the meeting, I made my way there. It was a cold, rainy evening, and I arrived a few minutes early, excited for the deal. 8 o'clock rolled in, but there was no sign of Rick. I called him, and he said he was running late, so he'd be here in 10 to 15 minutes. I was starting to have doubts whether this deal was in fact too good to be true. About 20 minutes later, an old pickup truck rolled into the gas station. An older guy, maybe in his 60s, got out and approached my car. I got out and introduced myself. "Hi, are you Rick?"
I sure am. Sorry for my late arrival. Come over to the truck to check out the guitar.
I went over. The guitar was in its case, and as Rick opened it, I felt a surge of excitement. It looked authentic, but as I examined it more closely, something felt off. The wear on the guitar seemed artificially aged, and the serial number was missing. Doubt crept in, and I started questioning Rick about the guitar's history. His attitude shifted. He became evasive, and he started looking around nervously. Sensing something was wrong, I decided to back out of the deal. "Sorry, but I don't think this guitar is genuine. I'm not interested." As I was putting the guitar back in its case, Rick swiftly pulled out a taser. Before I could react, he hit me with it, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. I fell to the ground, disoriented and temporarily paralyzed. Rick rifled through my jacket, taking my wallet and phone. With my belongings in his hand, he hopped back into his truck and drove off into the rain, leaving me lying there. I laid on the ground, with the rain pouring over me, thinking to myself what an idiot I was for believing this could be legit. A minute or so later, I slowly got back up on my feet, still shaking and aching all over. I made my way back to my car, but I was in no condition to drive yet. I got in and just sat there, no phone, and no way to contact anyone. A few minutes later, a car pulled in to refill. A woman got out. I explained what happened and asked if I could use her phone to call the police. The police arrived sometime later with an ambulance. The officers asked me a series of questions, gathering as much information as they could about Rick and his truck. The paramedics checked me over, ensuring that I hadn't sustained any serious injuries from the taser. They offered to take me to the hospital, but I declined, feeling more bruised and shaken than anything else. The officers told me that this kind of scam wasn't unheard of. Criminals often use valuable items like vintage guitars as bait to lure in victims. They advised that in the future, I should insist on public, well-lit places for such transactions, and if possible, bring someone with me. After the police took my statement, one of the officers drove me home. The ride was quiet, and my mind replayed the night's events. I felt a mix of anger and embarrassment. I had been so excited about the guitar that I had ignored the potential risks. Over the next few days, I kept in touch with the police, but there were no significant updates. I didn't take a look at his license plate, and my description of him wasn't a lot to go on. I began to accept that I might never get my belongings back or see Rick brought to justice.